Hi everyone, I'm Karen Van Holten, President of Monarch Title of Texas. One of our favorite parts about our job is closing you at the closing table. I'm going to go over for you some title disclosures. So those are basically items that the title company requires for you to sign at closing that just provide information and also show what we do and what we don't do in the closing process. First of all, if you are providing a survey to the buyer as the seller, let's say you had a survey done a couple of years ago and nobody needed a new one because the survey was just fine and there were no changes made to it. At closing, we'll go over the survey with the buyer, showing them where the boundary lines are, where the easements are, where the property is, and then we'll go over with the seller and ask them, hey, did you change anything on this survey during the time that you own the property or from the time the survey was done? And if the seller says, no, I didn't change anything at all, we have them sign a T47. So the T47 says from the seller, no, I didn't make any changes to the survey. And then the buyer relies on that and we accept the survey into our process. We also have a document called a Texas disclosure. As I've probably told you before, the closing disclosure that's signed at closing is actually a national form. So Texas requires us to provide you with additional information that some other states don't, such as if there are real estate agents involved in the transaction, what endorsements were added to the policy, did we charge fees for recording, and what was the total title policy premium, all listed in one place. That's called a T64 or a Texas disclosure, and both the buyer and the seller and the escrow officer sign that document. The next document that we typically have is called the tax proration agreement. This is an agreement between the buyer and seller that says what taxes are being prorated. Are we using last year's figures because we don't have this year's figures yet, which is common? We don't have a magic 8-ball here at the title company, so we have to use the best information available to us, which is typically the prior year's taxes until we get to about October or November. So everyone agrees what exemptions will be included on those tax prorations and how much those amounts are. Then everyone agrees who will be responsible for payment of those taxes. Typically, it is the buyer at the end of the year who's fully responsible for the payment of the taxes. Then the most important thing about this document is that the buyer and the seller both know that the title company has no way of knowing what the taxes may be, and so they actually hold the title company harmless from any discrepancies, and they agree to work those out amongst themselves. So it's a good idea to have this determined before you get to closing if you know that there's a special circumstance. The next document that you're going to see is from the attorney who drafted your warranty deed. The attorney is basically keeping in line with their confidentiality and conflict of interest policy by saying all they did was provide a document preparation service and not legal advice to either party or anyone else involved in the transaction. That is just called an attorney representation letter, and the lender may also have one for you to sign other than the title company attorney. The next document that you'll more than likely see is maybe a municipal utility district. That's very common out in the area that we service a lot. It's where there may be a special tax because there's no city water. It's provided through a separate district. We get both the buyer and the seller to sign this, and then we record it in the public records showing that it was signed. The next thing that you might see is, it depends if you're in a cash transaction or a lender transaction, what's included in the document, but it's called a complete closing affidavit or just a closing affidavit. In here, the escrow officer will go over several things with both the buyer and seller, but not everything applies to both buyer and seller. We also tell you in the beginning that if anything doesn't apply, then we're just going to cross it out at closing. So don't think that's strange if your escrow officer just takes a pen and makes an X through one of the items. The items covered in the closing disclosure affidavit or the closing affidavit are if there was an inspection done on the property, everyone acknowledges that the title company did not go to the property to inspect it. You would have had an outside inspection completed. You also acknowledge that you received a copy of your title commitment. That's usually done in the beginning of the transaction, and it's the document that we send out showing who is currently vested in title or who currently owns the property, and any type of liens or anything that we need to clear up before closing is listed, and also includes the premium, the policy premium estimate for the transaction. So we make sure that you got that by asking you, hey, did you get this? And then you initial it. The next thing you may see on that document is, were there any repairs involved in the transaction? Because we want to make sure that the buyer and seller both agree that all the repairs have been completed or will be completed based on an outside agreement between the parties. The next thing you have to look at is the survey coverage. So sometimes you get survey coverage. That's the best bet if you get your survey covered by the title company. It costs a little extra. But we are looking at this section and saying, was the property surveyed? Okay, did you accept the survey? Okay, or was the property not surveyed and you decided to forego that? Okay, then we have a different box for you to initial there. This document is kind of a catch-all if you haven't caught on yet. It covers a lot of different areas. We talk about the lien payoff. If we got a payoff for the seller, we got it directly from the lender, and we added probably 2 or 3 days to cover any of the processing time with the lender when we send the payoff, so it's not short. We have you initial that for us as well. If there is money in our escrow account, that is basically the earnest money or money from the lender, or funds that don't go out the same day of closing, we let you know that we don't earn interest on those funds. They're in non-interest bearing accounts. We also let you know about any affiliated business arrangements that we may have. We have you sign off on those. Additionally, we have the seller state that there's no one in the property or anyone who has a claim against the property that's going to hinder the buyer taking possession of the property after we're closed and funded. Then the buyer and seller both sign that document, and we're done with the complete closing affidavit. The next thing we have is an errors and omissions document, just because we hope that you would be fully cooperative if we needed an additional signature, an additional document, that you would help us do that. The next thing we ask is we just ask that everyone sign a buyer's or seller's information sheet for forwarding information. And that's it. Those are the only title disclosures we have you sign. And a lot of these can be reviewed and signed before you even get to closing if you want that option as well. Just ask one of your closers. So you can call us at Monarch Title of Texas at 832-404-2795. Thanks so much.